Right. Good afternoon to everyone who's joined us today. Welcome. My name is Daryl Killian, and I'm a partner of SRK South Africa and head up the ESG unit in Johannesburg. I've worked for the past 27 years in environmental management and development sectors, and have participated in and led teams responsible for the review and formulation of policy and strategy at local, national, and regional level. For the past 50 years, this work has been with SRK, and prior to that, with the Danish International Development Agency, DANIDA, and UCT. So SRK is certainly very pleased to host a webinar on water planning and management, 2 days after the World Water Day. The theme for the year is valuing water. It draws attention to the true multidimensional value of water and the need to safeguard the resource for all. I'm sure that you would all agree that in addition to highlighting the fragility of global networks and systems, the COVID pandemic has in essence forced us to make use of technology at our disposal in order to reach out and communicate. Online webinars and talks, such as this one, have allowed us to stay connected and share ideas. Against this background, SRK's global practices have been hosting the webinars for clients and interested stakeholders on a range of technical issues. The webinar today, titled Water for the Future, an African Perspective, is being hosted by a team of experts based in SRK's South African practice, who work on projects throughout the region. It will feature our collective expertise in responding to water management challenges in Africa. We estimate that the presentation will take approximately 30 minutes, followed by a 30-minute Q&A session. Today, Avril Owens, a principal scientist specializing in integrated water resources management, will be our presenter. She is supported by moderators Bianca Korb and Julia Barr. In addition, we have assembled a Q&A panel comprising a range of experts in SRK. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the panelists for taking time out of their busy schedules to be with us. In the interest of time, the panelists will be introduced after the presentation at the start of the Q&A session by Bianca Korb. So, firstly, a few housekeeping matters. Firstly, note that the webinar is being recorded. Please turn off your mic and your video functions. This will avoid any bandwidth issues or feedback while presenting. You're invited to submit comments or questions in the chat function during the presentation, and during the Q&A session, participants can also submit questions via the chat function. Questions will be addressed during the question and answer session. And of course, there might be more questions than we can handle in the 30 minutes that we have at our disposal. And those questions should be directed to Avril Owens at this email address stated on the slide. So with that, I'd like to hand over to my colleague, Avril Owens, to take you through the presentation. Thank you.
Hello everyone, as Daryl said, I'm Avril Owens and I've been with SRK for just over 12 years. I'm currently mainly involved in environmental and water authorizations, integrated water resource management, as well as auditing. As Daryl alluded to, today we're going to be talking, myself and the panel, talking about SRK's experience in working towards securing water for our future by delving into water management planning, which in our experience is key to achieving water sustainability and equity in Africa. I'm going to touch on firstly setting the scene by highlighting some of the major challenges in the region. Many of you will know about these challenges, but this is a brief revisit to contemplate what is truly at stake here. Then I'll focus on some of the water issues we're all facing. Next, I'll look at considerations for water management planning, and I'll share SRK's strategic perspective on water management and governance. After that, touch on some practical tools and requirements when undertaking water management planning, and I'll address some key obstacles that can derail your water management plans. Finally, I'll focus on SRK's integrated approach to water management planning, and at the end, I'll sum up the key points. So this section presents some sobering statistics that we have drawn from various sources. It provides a glimpse into the current water management challenges facing the continent and sets the scene for today's webinar. I would like you to think about what the reality is in terms of water. So spend a few seconds in silence, taking in the images and the information. So we've taken some time in silence, and I'm sure you'll agree that the current reality presents some major challenges. In the upcoming section, I want to highlight further issues we all face. Droughts. In 2019, an article indicated that drought affected more than 45 million people's access to food across 14 countries in Africa. Climate change could lead to major crop failure. People experiencing disasters like landslides, for example, in Kenya, 2019, and flooding, like the coastal floods in Tanzania. This is becoming more frequent. A significant portion of potable water in Africa is lost through leaks from deteriorating infrastructure. The losses are huge. For example, I was looking at Kenya, which was about 39 to 40%. South Africa was in the region of about 37%. Pollution and contamination in our rivers and our groundwater. Poor stormwater management, leading to pollution and even flooding. And collectively, all these constraints place huge economic pressure on countries and in the region as a whole, and it disrupts export revenue. So it's evident that we face enormous and complex challenges with regards to water. But how do we respond to these seemingly insurmountable challenges? SRK has extensive experience in dealing with and finding solutions to these challenges in all our projects across the continent. In the sections that follow, I'm going to share some of SRK's approaches to improving your water management planning, and we'll look at understanding strategic linkages, systematic planning, and adopting the integrated approach. I'll unpack our process thinking and insights to solving complex problems. So taking a strategic perspective on planning first helps to achieve water management goals regardless of the scale that you're working at or operating at, whether it's high-level transboundary catchment or project-specific level. So let's take a look at the strategic perspective. This schematic shows how SRK navigates the complex web of global, regional, and national goals, policies, and laws that influence water management planning, and I'm going to walk you through it. The top row guides strategic thinking through the African Union Agenda, which is a master plan for Africa, and then from a global level, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, as well as legal obligations to international conventions and multilateral agreements, among others. These provide guidance in formulating a water management plan at whichever level you're working at. They inform and influence how water management and water issues are approached. So let's move through to the right-hand side of the slide, which is the grayish-greeny colored leg. Many governments in Africa have ratified conventions and agreements, and this influences national law. These sovereign laws, in turn, inform the regulatory authorities on how to apply that law. Government ministries, regulators, action this water management through different mechanisms, like licenses and permits, and regulate licenses and permits, and these influence your water management plans. Moving to the left of the slide is the olivey colored leg. The AU Agenda 2063 wants to harmonize efforts in Africa to move towards sustainability. The agenda is not solely water focused, but is a framework that aims to facilitate improving water management. The African Water Vision, in turn, highlights a few of these things, such as sustainable access to safe and adequate water supply and sanitation, and water financed and priced to promote equity, efficiency, and sustainability. This is Africa taking control over its own destiny by informing a framework of action which has milestones that need to be achieved and which require funding. So this framework and the associated milestones are implemented through various structures, like your national bodies, ministries, institutes, and local authorities tasked with formulating policies and strategic plans. This in turn will be used to guide the formulation of water management plans and also links with obtaining funding. Now I want to move to the middle section of the schematic, which is highlighted in orange, and it features the financial institutions, funds, and development agencies. These are informed by law, your banks, facilities, and funds such as SADC, which has a water fund, developing agencies like the United Nations Development Programme, African Union Development Agency, NEPAD, they all align with these agendas, visions, and goals. And these financial institutions have developed their own standards, codes, guidelines, and principles, such as the ICMM and the Equator Principles. And these address various resources and thematic areas. Water is usually key among them. To access funding from these institutions, you must meet these standards, codes, guidelines, and principles, as well as align with regional development objectives. So the schematic is linking the higher level strategic thinking that you'll need to integrate into your water management plan and your projects so that you know you are striving for the right goals, and if you need funding, you're aligning correctly to receiving the funding. SRK is adept at navigating through these strategic considerations on all our projects. Then I want to mention that the Sustainable Development Goals in the schematic have multiple arrows, and this is to demonstrate how front of mind this is and emphasizes the increased urgency from the global community to recalibrate our development trajectory towards sustainability. Although these are not legal obligations, the Sustainable Development Goals are a plan of action to target and resolve the challenges we're facing on the planet. As Daryl mentioned, it was National Water Week, and he also said that it links to the SDG Goal 6. So I wanted to highlight how sub-Saharan Africa is doing in terms of the Sustainable Development Goal, number 6, which is water and sanitation, and then looking further into the requirements for integrated water resources management implementation. This spider diagram you're looking at indicates how well sub-Saharan Africa is doing based on 2017 data. The grey lines are the various country contributions within the region to this requirement. You can see that overall performance is at 40%, although there are favourable developments under institutions and participation. This map illustrates the degree of integrated water resources management implementation. So sub-Saharan Africa mostly lies between medium high and medium low, but the spider diagram only shows an overall performance of 40%. So there is opportunity for us to strengthen integrated water resource management implementation. So having discussed the framework schematic, you can see that there is a very high level of integration required when planning at the strategic level. But then you need to follow this through to the rest of the plan to get the best result. Integrated planning for SRK includes the coordination of a number of things, such as policy alignment, the tasks that are required, resources you need, which are human and financial, as well as stakeholder engagement. Let's delve into some of the tools on how to translate objectives into action by looking at the various elements needed for effective water management planning. So our approach is essentially informed by a classical or typical environmental management system, given its continuous improvement focus and component integration. So an organization may adopt or develop its own policy on water management. This requires a consideration of the higher level goals, visions, and laws, which I refer to in the schematic. Then your planning process will systematically work through the various elements, from strategy development to research and investigation, then move into water management plan development and implementation, which all needs to be monitored and evaluated to determine if the goals are being achieved. This refines and improves the overall water management plan, and you keep going on a continuous cycle, building more and more momentum and becoming more efficient and effective. I'm going to touch on the elements highlighted in the darker orange based on SRK's extensive project experience throughout the region. So the first one I'm going to touch on is baseline investigations. So firstly, know and define the spatial and systemic scales that you're working at. This is your scope. Your planning must be clear on the level you are working at so that the baseline investigations are tailored to the more strategic or higher level, like a catchment or a basin, versus a more focused and detailed project level, like a specific aquifer. Systemic could be investigating the effectiveness of a system at a company water management level or a national water management system. As the scale of the scope changes, so will the baseline investigations need to be adapted, and that will influence other elements in the water management planning cycle. A very important aspect is assembling the multidisciplinary team, and SRK focuses on integrating a diverse team. The team provides insights from various perspectives on the challenges from their expertise and reference point. Some of these disciplines form part of our panel here today, and you can pose questions to them. We have social scientists, natural scientists like hydrogeologists, engineers. In your team, you may even need planners, and they could be at a financial or an economic level. So a multidisciplinary team helps you cover all the necessary bases for a robust, practical, and a successful plan. This team then collects the available data, which is often limited, and it could take the form of various reports like a previous specialist study. Then you move on and you do research to supplement the information. Conducting research on case studies offers insights on what has been done elsewhere or what is the current context or state of play. So for example, you could reach across other countries or the world, or for example, look at a place that has a similar climatic condition. This research and data gathering will inform where the gaps are, And then you can devise and design site investigations and surveys. For SRK, this is where our specialist team will come up with the methodology and approaches, which includes undertaking studies such as a hydrocensus or an aquatic ecological assessment, a hydrological or hydrogeological investigation, and even community surveys. Our specialist teams then analyze and model the data gathered by making use of the latest software, which FeeFlow or ModFlow for groundwater, GoldSim or HECRAS 2D for hydrology, as well as others like Mike or Civil 3D. For the data analytics, we have a dedicated team who make use of the latest software to synthesize the data, and our specialists do the modeling and interpretation, but both teams work together to develop valuable insights because of the team's integrated efforts. Now you can start to synthesize the results into developing the action plans, which takes us to the next point. All right, plan formulation. So firstly, recheck that you're aligning with the policy and the higher level objectives, as I indicated in the schematic. Make sure your actions are aligning with these so you're achieving your goals. Then you use your baseline investigations to inform your actions and targets, ensuring that they're rooted in context and are pragmatic. Developed world solutions may not work in your situation because, for example, you may not have the infrastructure or the resources required. It would be very interesting if you posted comments on what your experience has been in terms of how to develop actions and targets. The next point is important and often glossed over. Assign realistic timeframes and put thought into this to make it practical. When assigning responsibility, SRK's approach is to look at existing structures and forums or groups and leverage off these. So start where you are and then you build up from there. The last key point is about monitoring and evaluating your plan. Monitoring and evaluation, or M&E, is often, in our experience, not well developed and almost undervalued, yet is critical to success. So for us, first and foremost, M&E is to collect documentation related to the plan execution, and then you audit these to see how the implementation is progressing. So it's valuable to have regular internal audits and then also an external process, which provides an objective overview. The next step is to develop a checklist. And this makes sure that you cover all the bases so you don't miss anything. This is an obvious tool, and you will be surprised at how little is actually used. A checklist is an organizational tool, and that helps you systematically cover all the aspects of your auditing and checking. If things don't get done diligently, you waste a lot of money and time, and this has a knock-on effect to the rest of the water management plan. So your checklist will help you determine who you need to talk to. Where do you need to undertake your site investigations so that you can ground truth what's happening? Interview the people that are involved in the water management plan. Get the person perspective that may not come through in documents. So 1 or 2 discussions can quickly identify issues that need attention. Then you report on your findings and you focus on opportunities for improvement. By sharing these findings and working through them with the right people, you discover more insights. Maybe more context comes to light, and this can influence the way forward. The reporting can also take the form of lessons learned, and then you leverage off these lessons and improve and strengthen the plan and the implementation. So you keep moving through this water management plan cycle and checking if you're meeting the higher goals and visions. Do you understand your resource fully? Have you got the right team? Where is further development needed? And collectively, SRK's multidisciplinary team, with our experience in all of our projects, we've been through this cycle numerous times and have had the opportunity to work in improvements. So what I'm talking about isn't groundbreaking stuff. But in reality, we saw in SDG 6.5.1 that we're not actually implementing water management as well as what we should. So it's back to basics, putting in the right thinking and the hard work. Having shared some of SRK's insights in future-proofing water management plans, it is important to proactively identify and address obstacles as early as possible during planning. I'm going to suggest a few, and maybe you would like to mention other key obstacles you have encountered in the chat. When developing water management plans, we found that there are gaps at the strategic level. So some policies are limited and outdated. There's a lot of policy reform underway in the African region, and it's helped by banks like GIZ and World Bank. In recent years, a revision of environmental assessment legislation is happening, but some of the laws and water policies are quite old and may need to be revised to align with more recent visions and global direction. A high-level review needs to be undertaken to make sure that the strategic level, like your laws, are updated and aligned with international thinking and objectives. I'm sure you'll agree, you need resources and money to develop and implement plans. So this may be a fiscal constraint, or you might need to source external funding. So based on the earlier schematic, you'll need to meet certain criteria to receive this funding. In programs that SRK has prepared, where donor funding is being accessed, it takes a large amount of time to develop a plan, to align with these funds, to receive the money. So plan ahead. What money do you need? Which funds can you tap into? What do you need to do to source and access this money? Address this obstacle proactively because it can derail your plans. Then next, when planning, take into account any water resource restrictions. There is only so much resource and many want to tap into it. So before you think about what you can provide, check what is available. Water restrictions can be quantity or quality or both. So your plan may not be supported in reality by the water resource due to the restrictions at various levels. So in South Africa, a groundwater and a surface water reserve is determined, and this is then divided between the environment and people needs. More often than not, there are more user needs to be met than what is actually available in the resource. So this is why your baseline studies and your regulator laws, for example, must be understood and executed properly so that you do not come short in this area. Do you have the right resources required for the water management plan? Awareness, training, and skills are essential to the overall success of a water management plan. Human and supporting resources are often not available. We know of regional programs that are primarily focusing on skills development and training because this need is essential. Without the right people that know and understand the water resource, the engineering, the data management, your plan may also come to a grinding halt. So identify where the gaps are and include training and skills development in your water management plan. The last obstacle that I'm going to mention is who takes on the water stewardship role. So without a water stewardship role filled, there is no driving force behind the plan that turns that wheel or moves you through that cycle that I spoke about earlier. This could be, for example, a catchment management agency or an institution, a business, or a specific group, but it is essential. Then not only do you need a water stewardship role filled, but that role needs to ensure collaboration with all the relevant stakeholders. A lack of collaboration can lead to conflict, which can cause disintegration of your water management plan or your project. And what comes to mind is transboundary interactions. So agreements around these areas actually need to be better. And a lot can be worked out if there's improved stakeholder engagement, collaboration, and communication. And this has actually been cited as one of the reasons for success in some catchment management agencies, such as the Breede Gorit CMA in South Africa, and SADC has a protocol on shared water courses and has several plans related to driving this protocol to facilitate collaboration. So these obstacles are some of the important make or break elements to water management and establishing and executing water management plans at any level. An SRK's team is familiar with these obstacles and can proactively address these in projects at the start of the planning process. So in this last slide, I want to emphasize an integrated approach to water management from the get-go and throughout the entire water management planning phase and execution. So based on SRK's experience, integration paves the way for greater water management success. Need for integrative water management planning. We need to link and bring all the various elements together. So some of the key elements that we found include, firstly, checking the whole way through your planning that you're aligning with policy, vision, and your SDG goal. Refer to the schematic and ensure that you're striving towards higher level thinking, like meeting SDG 6. Throughout the entire process, you need to engage with a multidisciplinary team because this provides a holistic view of the challenges rather than tunnel vision. It inherently brings with it a multifaceted approach to innovative thinking and finding the right solutions. Key to integration is developing good and continual communication between the team and stakeholders. This is vital to create effective collaboration, which is essential for water management success. And don't reinvent everything. Where you integrate with what you already have, do that. Try and integrate with what you have. Take into account existing capacity and structures and mechanisms for planning and implementation. And then identify where the training and the skills development is needed, and then you build up from there. Lastly, planning and implementation needs funding. Understanding the costs and sourcing the funding is vital for integration and overall success. If you don't have the funding, you won't have the multidisciplinary team. You won't be able to fulfill all your communication and your stakeholder engagement. And how are you going to go through your cycle and get to the end and do the M&E and then implement your improvements? So to finish off, let me sum up just a few key points. So firstly, I highlighted the dire water situation in Africa, which needs to be addressed a lot more vigorously. And from SRK's perspective, sound water management planning is the first step. I touched on key strategic perspectives you need to integrate into your water management planning. So remember the schematic. Then I gave an overview of a cyclical planning approach because it's systematic, effective, and organized. I spoke about identifying and mitigating obstacles as early as possible in the planning. And then finally, our approach is to adopt an integrative mindset that links together all the elements I spoke about today, such as building a multidisciplinary team and working towards collaboration, so that you can develop robust water management plans and move towards sustainability, equitable distribution, and in that way, have water for the future. And with that, I'm pleased to hand over to Bianca, who will introduce you to our panel. Thank you for your time today.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Avril. I'll start by introducing myself. I'm Bianca Korp, an environmental engineer specializing in water management. I'm passionate about making water management solutions sustainable, and I'll be moderating the panel today. Today, we have a panel of professionals with a variety of experience in water management. The panel was compiled with the view of showcasing the multidisciplinary nature of water-related problems and how we at SRK approach and solve the complex problems relating to water management. We have engineering, science, and social science experts on our panel. Please feel free to post any questions during the panel session, and we will endeavor to answer your questions. Any questions that we cannot answer in the allocated time, we will contact you at a later date to arrange a follow-up to answer those questions. The first two panel members you are already familiar with. Our presenter, Avril Owens, an expert in integrated water resources management, and Daryl Killian, who's our moderator, who brings in his expertise in environmental policy and strategy to the panel. We then come to Julia Barr. She's a water scientist with a passion for water stewardship and governance. And then an aspect of global importance and a growing global importance is stakeholder engagement. And leading us through this topic is Vasi Maharaj, a specialist in stakeholder management. Not to neglect the deep science, we have Ismail Mohammed, a groundwater specialist with a wealth of experience in water supply in the sub-Saharan African region. We now come to our engineers, Lucky, Xanthi, and Jandre. Lucky is a civil engineer with a deep understanding of what is required in the planning and execution stages of water projects. Xanthi is an environmental engineer and SRK's digital transformation lead and a specialist in water management. Last but not least, we have Jandre Thompson, who specializes in hydrology, contamination rehabilitation, and infrastructure design. So I would like to kick us off with Ismail Mohammed. Ismail, perhaps you could take us through some of the practical challenges that you've encountered when it comes to the implementation of water supply projects in sub-Saharan Africa and how you have addressed these in your experience.
Yeah, one of the aspects that's most probably not often considered is the detailed planning requirements for groundwater development. Bianca, you would appreciate that we often use contractors and procure their services. These would be pump test contractors and drilling contractors who would need to install bores to the required design. And the pump testing contractors would need to carry out tests suitably so that we can determine the sustainable yield of boreholes. And with drilling in remote areas and areas where there is a lack of infrastructure, it becomes imperative that we have an upfront discussion with the drillers and other stakeholders and clients and drillers, and probably multiple meetings to determine what's the aim and the objective and the requirements and logistics of the drill program. So it is important to troubleshoot at those meetings what could go wrong and plan with the contractors accordingly. SRK, as a starting point, puts out specifications for contractors as well as bill of quantities, which are tailored for each project. And in that process, it's important to consider what are the limitations and where materials might not be available, what alternatives could be considered, and what are the engineering constraints. So, even the most simplest of things could get you unstuck. A contractor failing to refuel the generator and halfway through the test, the generator stops working. That's quite a simple thing to fix, but you can never overplan. And so it just highlights the need to use proficient contractors and to have a working relationship early on with contractors. Thanks, Bianca.
Thank you, Ismail. So you've alluded a lot to planning, and I realize that this is a critical aspect. So to tell us a bit more about the planning stages, I'm going to hand over to Lucky. And Lucky, can you tell us what some practical planning elements are to consider when implementing these water infrastructure projects?
Well, Bianca, we must appreciate that water resource systems are unique and will often come with their own set of unique challenges. I mean, one cannot approach a river system as you would a groundwater system, for instance. And no two river systems or groundwater systems are the same. It is for this reason that these challenges would have to be comprehensively defined and addressed in their own unique way. There are, however, some elements shared between various projects. Firstly, the vision of the project should be well defined and seek to address a specific need. It will also go a long way that the vision or approach is deeply rooted, as Avril touched on in the presentation. Once the vision is established, you will need to develop a strategy or approach on how to realize that vision by specifying objectives and criteria, which will also inform the design. SRK, we as SRK, we are equipped and with the expertise to assist our clients to navigate through these planning and implementation of various infrastructural projects. Further to that, it must be stressed that the involvement of appropriate stakeholders in each stage of the planning framework, from inception right through to implementation, is crucial to the success of your project. This may be a time and cost-consuming process, but this aspect will go a long way to contributing to the sustainability of your project. I mean, I'm sure you will agree that people are more likely to protect and use infrastructure that they had a hand in developing. It gives them a sense of ownership. I hope this answers your question, at least at a general level, Bianca.
It does, and thank you for highlighting the importance of planning. You mentioned something very critical as well, right towards the end, and that is stakeholder engagement. So we know that there's been a lot of international media attention around this. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Vasi and to try and find out what actually makes for a rich stakeholder consultation process.
That's an excellent question, Bianca, and one we often get asked by our clients and water specialists. In water management planning, it is critically important to first understand the diversity of stakeholder sectors that we need to be involved, to identify them upfront, and ensure that they are engaged throughout the project, as we've heard from Lucky. In identifying stakeholders, we need to involve more. We need to think broader, look beyond the project area and just the water-related authorities and immediate communities. We must be inclusive and understand and involve all representatives from the various sectors. For example, your policymakers and other relevant government departments, your water user sectors, for instance, including the irrigation boards, the water users associations. Agriculture is a huge user of water. The water conservation agencies, your catchment management forums, the transboundary water management authorities and institutions, as Avril mentioned, as well as academia and research organizations. And the key is to be as inclusive and representative as possible. I trust that answers the question. Back to you, Bianca.
Thanks, Vasi. That is certainly some food for thought, and it further highlights how broad and vast the stakeholders are. So now, hopping into more into a design focus, I would like to ask Zanti the next question, and that is, Zanti, in your experience, what are some of the biggest obstacles you encounter in the planning and design stages for water management in sub-Saharan Africa?
Yeah, there's quite a few, but one that I feel is the most crucial and critical, and also the most exciting, Bianca, is data. So it's what actually happens before the design phase. Every design is dependent on the data that's supported. So for instance, if you're designing a water treatment plant, you need to have water quality data on what that water quality is like. That completely underpins the design. And fortunately, the reason I say it's exciting is that at the moment, a number of excellent technologies are becoming available that are much more accessible to record, manage, and communicate this data, and also to record far more data than we ever did. For example, take water meters. However, now you can have those water meters at a relatively affordable price, pushing to a web-based where everyone can see one version of the truth. So that's really, really useful for a project team. Everyone is looking at the same thing. And it's actually really come in handy a few times. So looking at data that we've collected in this way, we've been able to identify for clients actually losing a lot of water to leaks that they pay for from a municipality. We had a project where we managed to actually reduce the size of a treatment plant by looking at the data. And this is because we looked at the data and we saw all these spikes in the data that you could only see by collecting data quite frequently. And those were actually storm surges. So there was water that was getting to this treatment plant, which was not intended, it wasn't meant to be getting there. So that really generated a great. So in summary, data, that's really what underpins design. It's the foundation of everything.
Yes, data is going to be driving a lot of our decisions and, very importantly in the design stages. So in terms of some what we find to be prohibitive, Jean-Dre, maybe you can take us through what are some issues that are prohibitive to development and implementation of water supply and sanitation projects in Africa? Jean-Dre, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Thanks, Bianca. Can you hear me now?
Yes, loud and clear.
Great. Sorry about that. Like my colleagues have already mentioned, there's a whole host of problems that face the development and maintenance issues for water supply and treatment in Africa and other parts of the world as well. These are predominantly the supply of technology and materials and plant in order to build the infrastructure and to keep it running and to maintain it. Access to certain areas can be very difficult sometimes. Electrical supply and the stability of the supply can also be very big problems. And then going hand in hand with that is the problem with theft going on in vast parts of the world, where you would put down brand new plant and it would get stolen overnight. So SRK has addressed a lot of these problems by implementing interesting types of technologies not normally implemented in your more developed areas, where we would rather go and substitute plastic type applications instead of steel type applications, which is less prone to theft, or try and get away from an electrical type of application, rather use a mechanical type of application that can be run off a diesel generator or other energy sources not necessarily tied to a country's electrical grid. And then another big problem that's also been plaguing the development of water treatment and water supply systems is funding. Always when you talk about funding, there's the ugly corruption that starts rearing its head, and it makes it very difficult to fast track the development or even to do it at a normal pace. A lot of the time, the grant people or the financing people, the banks, those type of people are very scared to make the money available at the start of a project. They first want everything in place to make sure that there's no way corruption can take place. And it still does. And it's always the user that gets penalized at the end. And then another big problem we've also been facing is the operators themselves that need to operate and maintain these plants. Most of the time, the people are very willing to do the work, but they don't receive the proper training to do the work. They're not always schooled enough to do the work on their own. So we write operation maintenance manuals for these, but ultimately it comes down to the operators and the operating authority to ensure that these operating and maintenance manuals get implemented properly and followed to the letter. and that will ensure that the plant operates effectively and for its design life. But yes, it's not always followed. In fact, in most cases, it's not followed. It's a book that sits in the corner gathering dust.
Some very insightful, some very good insights, and it seems that it comes down to support and spreading the money to the right places. So a lot to think about, Jean-Andre. I'm going to move on to more of a policy slant now and ask Daryl the question that, based on what we've heard from the presenters that have just spoken, we've heard about challenges, and it's clear that Africa still faces many water management challenges. What are the main policy instruments that are available for water resources management?
Thanks, Bianca. Yeah, as we'd heard from Avril during the discussion, there are a number of policy instruments. I mean, it all depends on the scale that you're talking about, and it ranges from regional to sub-regional through to national level. And certainly at the regional level, what Avril alluded to in the water governance schematic was the influence, the importance of the sort of African Union agenda, the SDGs and the like, as well as multilateral environmental agreements. And those essentially would effectively influence policy, both at that regional level, but also at the sub-regional level. And to give some examples around the sub-regional level, about some of the mechanisms there, the Southern African Development Community, which comprises something like 16 member states, they have a whole range of protocols. I think last count was somewhere in the region of 26 protocols, which essentially provide some form of guidance in terms of how to manage certain aspects and coordinate activities across the region. One that I think Avril alluded to briefly was that of the protocol of shared watercourses, and that was developed around 2000 and is effectively given more being implemented through a number of strategic plans. And those protocols and mechanisms are very important because of the fact that many of the water basins in the region cross international boundaries, cross multiple countries. So that's at the sort of sub-regional level. Certainly coming down to the national level, you would also have a whole range of policies there, and those policies will be directed by sort of political objectives and priorities. So it depends on what sort of level, what scale you're looking at, as to what type of mechanism, and it's important to actually get a handle on that, when starting the planning process.
Okay, so I hear about the importance of matching the right instrument to the right scale. Thank you, Daryl. My next question is aimed at Julia. So we often hear integrated water resources management, we hear about water stewardship. Can you maybe just give us a little bit of insight about how these two are linked, and if they are linked?
Thanks, Bianca. Well, to briefly summarize, water stewardship actually promotes integrated water resources management. These two actually work hand in hand. They both look at how water resources could be managed, and if possible, could be improved from the broader level, so from the catchment level, all the way down to the surrounding users, to the stakeholders, as Vasi explained, and down to the site level using integrated approaches. And by bringing together these approaches, such as the ones that Avril discussed earlier, you're not only ensuring that integrated water resources management is met, but also that water stewardship is implemented. Now, SRK ensures that water stewardship aspects are incorporated when we develop our water management plans. And some of the staff have been trained in water stewardship and have attended courses. And we are therefore aware of the links between water stewardship and integrated water resources management. And we try to bring these links in through all the water work that we do.
Great, that clarifies it a little bit for me, and I will definitely be looking for how we can enhance and use the synergies of those two principles. So, as a final question to our final panelist, who is Avril, our presenter, we know that we can't develop water management plans in isolation without considering each other. So, what are some of the typical instruments or mechanisms for managing the quantity of water abstracted from surface water and groundwater resources in the region?
So Bianca, primarily it's going to be your laws and regulations in a country that you will use, and then you're going to develop your maybe standards or guidelines, and that can help you with actually assessing or determining the actual resource. And I speak about the resource restrictions. And there are studies that will actually influence this, like, so for example, there's resource mapping that we know is happening in the region. And then basically I would be working, so for example, with our specialists like Ishmael or Jean-Ray to quantify that resource, and then we will work through what the management aspects will be around looking after that resource. And then I'll go through the whole process with a client on how you will go through the process of applying for a license or a permit. And then that is your
Fantastic. That brings us to the end of our panel discussion. I see that we have not received questions in the chat. So I'm going to hand over to Daryl to wind us up. But just if anyone has questions, just to repeat, please do email Avril and we will endeavor to get back to you. I would like to hand over to Daryl to wrap everything up.
Thank you so much, Bianca, for facilitating that input from the panelists. It certainly highlights the fact that there are many sort of complex and multidimensional issues that need to be considered when looking at water management planning, and certainly the inputs from the panelists indicate as such. So yeah, we've come to the end of our 1 hour session. Thank you so much for your time. We know that we all have a busy schedule, so we certainly appreciate your involvement. And thank you so much, and we wish you a good day further. Bye-bye.